Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Nadine and I have lived in China for the past 10 years and I like to make vlogs about our life in China and what life is really like here. And recently I've started this video series where I go back 10 years ago and I tell a little story of when I first arrived back in China. So it's like a little time traveling back to 10 years ago and what it was like when I first arrived here and how you can really tell the changes in China and also myself. So this is going to be episode 4. If you haven't subscribed yet, I would please ask you to do so. That would be really great. And let's get right into it. I slept well that night. Really well. I was obviously so tired and jet lagged. And the next morning I woke up and I just lay in bed for a while. I was honestly too scared to get up and open the curtains and look out the window because I wasn't ready to see China, not this early in the morning. So I just lay there and in the distance I could hear people talking, some people shouting, some people laughing, but it's almost as if it fell on silent ears because I couldn't understand anything that they were saying. To me, it was quiet. Their talking was mere noise. And for the first time in very long, it was just me and my own thoughts. And it was nice. It was very zen. It was only a while later that I really started to notice the sound of the traffic outside and cars were honking endlessly. I eventually decided to just get up and open the curtains. When I did, I saw a big building across the road with the name Gome or Gome written all over it, and to the left was some sort of park covered in white snow, and the trees all lined up on the sidewalk were all dead because of course it's winter. It's like in the middle of winter, but it did look nice with the white snow on the ground. And people were walking everywhere. Now, it was at this time when I noticed that most of the people were wearing masks over their mouths and noses, and I wondered if this was because of pollution. Now, I know that in today's climate, 2022, masks are a very controversial thing to a lot of people, and I'm just here to tell you that 10 years ago, and I'm pretty sure 10 years before then, people in China were wearing masks, and today, after living here for 10 years, I firmly believe that maybe 80% of the reason people wear masks in winter is actually because it keeps your face warm. When it's minus 20 degrees outside and you have no idea how cold that air can be, a mask that just kind of covers your whole face is really, really pleasant. And I do so all the time, even before the pandemic. And also in winter, when there's a lot of, colds and flu going around, when you're in a crowded transportation like the bus or the subway, it's nice to kind of feel like you have some level of protection over your face because people would sneeze and cough in your face without any problem because it's very crowded. So at the time, I thought it was for pollution, but looking back at it now, I think it was more to do with keeping your face warm and just kind of, try not to catch people's colds because everyone was always stuffed into the subway and stuffed into the buses. So anyway, let's move on. There was also a lot of traffic and certainly a lot more than the previous night, of course. I was sitting on my bed watching the outside world and I noticed how different the traffic lights were because the lights were either red or green, obviously, but next to the light was a counter which counts down the time until when the light would change. So this, of course, helps if you are driving towards an intersection where your light is green. At any moment, if that light turns yellow or orange, whatever you call it, that's gives you a little fright. So at least with these lights, oh my goodness, in 10 seconds, that light is going to, change color. So I assume that helps to avoid a lot of accidents. I've never seen this in South Africa. I haven't lived in South Africa for 10 years, so I don't know if that's there now or not. So I got up and I went to the bathroom and that smell hit me again. It was a smell that was somewhat familiar, but at the same time, it was completely new to my senses. All I knew was I did not like it. And at this point, I felt extremely dehydrated. I would do anything just to have a cup of water. And I promised myself in that moment that I would never again complain about having to drink water. Water is not the best tasting thing in the world, but there's nothing quite as horrible as being super, super thirsty and not having access to any water. Now, it was at this point where I started to think about what I'm going to wear, because the night before I was extremely cold. So I figured I'm going to have to layer quite a bit in order to beat the cold. And I did just that. I lay out a bunch of my clothes on my bed and I just started to layer layers upon layers of clothes upon myself. Now, at this point, I needed coffee. Okay, I was tired, and without my morning coffee, I would be a zombie the entire day. That's just on a normal day. So not to mention traveling, across the world, going through all of these things, I really needed my coffee. And then I suddenly realized that coffee shopping might be a little more complicated than what I'm used to. The thoughts running through my head, like, will they have sugar? What about milk? Would milk even be fresh? Or should I just stick to creamer? What about a kettle? What if there's no kettle in my house? Or what if there's no kettle in China even? And my coffee panic came to an abrupt halt when I kept hearing this intercom-like talking coming from the streets. I looked out my window to try and see where it was coming from, but I couldn't see anything. I could just hear it. All I knew was that it was very annoying. It was as if this woman was talking over a loudspeaker, repeating the same sentence over and over and over again in like a monotone voice. And it was very strange, almost trance-like, very lost, like Dharma Initiative stuff. I started feeling hot, uncomfortably hot. And when I looked at the aircon, it was set at 30 degrees. So here I was sitting in a room that is 30 degrees with layers upon layers of clothing. So I started taking it off again. I was listening to all the crazy honking in the streets, but at the same time thinking about other things. And I was listening to all this crazy honking in the streets and all the sounds, all the noises, when suddenly a particular honking session started to sound like almost like a rhythm of a song. And that's when I suddenly remembered, when all the noises and everything gets too much in China for my brain to process, I could always just plug in my earphones and just shut out the world and listen to music. I would just have to be very careful not to get run over by cars or bikes or other people on the sidewalks. Maina had told me that she would be picking me up at 10 a.m. I only went to bed at around 2 a.m. the previous night, and I hadn't slept on the plane at all. I was jet lagged and I was feeling it. So at 10 o'clock, she wasn't there yet, and I decided to play some music on my phone to keep me company. Eventually, I lay back down on the bed again, and if I were to close my eyes, I would have slept for 10 days straight. But about 20 minutes later, Maina showed up and we gathered all of my luggage again. And just as we were about to leave the hotel, I suddenly thought of something. I ran back upstairs to my room and I did in fact leave my adapter plugs in the wall. Imagine that. We stepped outside and the freezing cold air hit me again in a way that words cannot explain. We loaded all my heavy bags back into her car again, and she asked me what I wanted for breakfast. So she was like, hamburger? And I was thinking to myself, well, that's not something I've ever eaten for breakfast. Who would eat a hamburger for breakfast? But I don't know, maybe she thinks that's what we do. So I just kind of agreed. I said, okay, if that's what you want to do, let's do it. So we must have driven for about 2 kilometers, but it took about 30 minutes because there was just so much traffic and it was just insane, okay, getting down this road. For those of you who has ever seen the movie Eat, Pray, Love, when Liz leaves Italy and is driving in a taxi in India going to her hotel, that scene in the movie, this is what I felt like. Except, of course, the taxis were normal cars and this was just the bustling city. But it was the same kind of overwhelming feeling, the whole thing that I was experiencing. So we went to McDonald's and I ordered a cappuccino. We then went to the other side to order food and everything looked so different. There were a few familiar items on the menu. Like the first one I remembered was the Big Mac. It was the first familiar thing I recognized. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little bit nervous to order anything because prior to coming to China, people were always telling me like, oh, don't eat the meat and be careful of the meat and this is this. So of course I'm new here. I remember all these things people kept telling me, people who's never even been to China, okay? And I just couldn't help myself but thinking like, should I be eating the meat, at McDonald's? So I really wasn't sure what to order, and I recognized the Big Mac, but I thought that Maina would think that I'm just a fat foreigner if I order the biggest hamburger on the menu for breakfast. So she asked me if I wanted this grilled chicken burger, and that's what she was gonna get, so I just agreed. Now, I would later come to regret this, and in my 10 years of living in China, I would never eat that particular grilled chicken burger again because it just wasn't good. It wasn't, and it still isn't to this day. Now we went back to the seated area, and like a glorious ray of sunshine, there on the table stood the most beautiful looking cup of coffee, my cappuccino, of course, and it was just yelling my name. I sat down and I took my first sip of coffee, and it was one of those moments where you could just sink back into your chair and you could just feel the endorphins being released. I didn't know where I would live and if I would have a kettle, but one thing I now knew for sure was that I could always count on McDonald's to just give me my coffee fix, save the day. So as I was like enjoying this moment and just like feeling complete like peace, I looked over at Maina, and she was literally stuffing her face with fries. And she was just eating so fast. And at one point, I was really scared for her that she was going to choke on her fries. I literally couldn't believe how fast she was eating. By the time I had eaten half of my fries, she was done with her entire meal. And the food was quite hot. Now, when I took a bite of my burger, I just could immediately tell that this was not something that I was going to enjoy. But, I was a polite person. I was not going to insult someone by not eating the food. So I ate as much as I could of it until I just eventually told her that I was full. So Maina just looked like she was in a hurry all of the time, and it looked like she needed to be somewhere. So I quickly sipped on my scorchingly hot coffee just to finish it off, and then off we went. She led the way and I just followed. Now, if I thought that Wei walked fast, then what Maina did must be flying. So now we were inside a mall, and every shop we passed, people would come to the door and look at us walk by. It was quite unnerving. We reached the elevator, and as soon as I stepped into the elevator, there it was, that smell. It literally made my stomach turn, and I don't know what it was. I put my scarf over my face to cover my nose and my mouth, and before I knew it, we reached the 11th floor. We went inside, and Maina told me that this was her office. She pointed to the sofa, and she said, "Sofa bed." There was now another girl with us, and Maina introduced her as Miss Han. We sat for a little while, and they were rambling off in Chinese, and Miss Han left and came back after a while, and she had this little plastic bag with her with some kind of food item in it. And she offered me some, and of course, again, I'm a polite person. I just, take some and say thank you. Maina told me, be careful, it's very spicy, but I was already committed halfway to taking one, so I was not gonna be like, oh no, I don't want it. So I just took it and I put it in my mouth, and just as Maina warned me, it was spicy as hell, okay? I never knew that Chinese food was that spicy. So I chewed it slowly, and it was a strange texture. I, to this day, do not know what that was. I tried to chew, I tried to swallow it, I couldn't. And it was at this point where I realized I'm gonna have to stop being polite and taking everything that is offered to me because, I need some time to adjust to the different new tastes and all the different new foods. It's not gonna happen overnight. So I was looking around trying to find a bin in this office, and I couldn't see one, which was a little weird. So I just kind of stuck the piece of whatever it was in my cheek, and I was thinking I will just wait until we leave and I would find a bin and I would just, spit it out or chuck it out. So after about 5 minutes, we left, and it was at this point that we passed by Starbucks, and I was ecstatic because I lived in America before, and my favorite thing to do was to go to Starbucks with my friend, and we would just drink frappuccinos, because in South Africa, back then, we didn't have, that was like 2009. That was my first Starbucks experience, that was like, ooh, so cool, Starbucks. So Maina went outside to fetch her car, and Miss Han and I, we were waiting inside the mall where it was warm. And at this point, I couldn't take the spiciness in my mouth anymore. So when she didn't look, I spit it out. So after Maina came, we drove around the city, and it is impossible for me to even tell you about the driving in the city because I don't even have words to describe it. It was just different. I think as a South African, if I ever had to drive here, I would not survive because we suffer from severe road rage. And here it's like everyone does everything wrong that you could possibly do wrong on a road. But no one kind of cares, you know, no one gets mad, no one starts shooting each other like they would back home. You know, it's kind of just like, it's normal. So it felt like we drove for hours, but it must have been only 40 minutes. And Maina then told me that we were at the office of an agency. So we went into this building, and again, the elevator with its very odd smell. Now, after 10 years, I can't say that I smell any smells in elevators anymore. Maybe I just gotten used to it. I still don't know what it is or what it was. So when we got to their office, I saw Wei again, and she told me that I could use her computer to send an email if I wanted. I didn't really need to because I was using WhatsApp to communicate with my family, but I figured since I'm here, I might as well just, you know, type a little email, send a little email. So at this point, Wei said that I would be back to Shenyang on Monday, and that's when I would meet the other 2 South Africans. And this really sent me into a panic because as far as I understood, I would be living in Shenyang. So I really didn't know what they meant when they said I would return to Shenyang. At this point, I had no idea where am I even going to be living. So we were on our way out again, and just before leaving, Wei just handed me a few coffee sachets, and that would be super helpful while I try to navigate, you know, the supermarkets and find sugar and creamer or milk, whatever, because I actually brought some Jacob's coffee from home. And once again, we had to face the traffic, and about 30 minutes later, we finally left the city, which was not even that far kilometer-wise. And we were now apparently on our way home to my new home. And I had no idea where we were going.